So you want to know what the best weapons and gear are for Archero? Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin, a huge thank you and shout out to Reddit user SkyIir, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, I'm really sorry if I'm not, who has taken the time to calculate all the information provided in this video for us. There will be a link to the original Reddit thread in the description box below. This video will be a mixture of my own research, others in the community, and SkyIir's, but will mainly consist of SkyIir's information. I'll be going through in order by weakest to the strongest of weapons. We'll talk about their pros and cons, any pairings worth mentioning, and conclusion with tips. So first, let's get through the worst to the best weapons of Archero. Before we begin, I'd like to add that all weapons are great in a way depending on what you're after. As SkyIir said, play what you love most. All weapons are viable and strong. RNGing with the right skills is the true deciding factor in DPS. With that said, weapons do have their own perks and situational advantages. This will all be based on stats and numbers, also taking into account their epic effects. These stats are ran from their legendary level 60 weapon values. These stats include a 15% crit chance and 100% crit damage applied. Just a quick little glossary for you so you can follow and understand completely. Base damage refers to your damage on the equipment screen modified by your weapon modifier. DPS is short for damage per second, calculated by weapon damage times damage multiplier times attack speed times the result of 1 plus crit chance times crit damage. I know, if you're like me and you hate math, don't worry, our superhero user SkyIir has calculated this for us. Let's start with the worst weapon in terms of value. Coming at number 4 at the bottom of the tier list is the Brave Bow. Now the bow is what everyone begins with when starting out in Archero. With an attack speed of 1.73, base damage of 1349, this results in a DPS value of 2859 along with the crit and the damage multiplier of 1. The Brave Bow's epic stat is crit damage plus 50%. The pros of the bow is that it's a great all-rounder, it reloads fast as a tornado weapon, its projectiles travel fast as the blade weapon, the epic crit passive gives it a scythe headshot feel to it, of course not as effective. The wolf ring complements the bow well because of its extra crit damage. Now the cons of the Brave Bow is that it's overshadowed by the other weapons. Bow requires the wolf rings to catch up and output the same DPS as the other 3 weapons. Needs good skill RNG to come into fruition. The crit major skill is currently glitched. If the devs decide to fix this, then this skill would greatly assist the bow. Bow requires good skill RNG on most chapters and near perfect skill RNG on chapters 10 and 11. Wolf rings are not recommended in chapters 7+, as they only increase damage versus melee units, which puts the bow at a disadvantage. Now coming up in second place on this tier list is the Saw Blade. Now the blade doesn't have the best rep. Popular opinion is that it's the weakest weapon in the game. That's actually not true. According to the stats, the blade is the second strongest starting weapon. With the highest attack speed of 2.6 and a base damage of 1079, this results in a DPS value of 3227 along with the crit and damage multiplier of 0.80. The pros of the blade, this weapon gives you strong mobility. This is great because there are so many levels and boss fights where you're constantly attacking and moving. It has the best feeling and reaction time. Due to its natural quickness, its shots will successfully connect more often with moving targets. This results in higher DPS. Blade starts out strong in the first couple of levels. A common blade deals slightly more DPS than a great bow. This weapon works nicely with lightning arrows. With multi-shot, this weapon becomes second best in the knockback department. Extra strong during early chapters, extra strong in chapter 9 where mobility is key. Blade is good in chapter 3, 5, and 8 with multi-shot, and it is strong in chapter 9. Now the cons for Blade, it may need ricochet or bounce and pierce with bonus arrow skills for splash damage. It's not the best in shoot once and dodge scenarios, and that's because of its rapid fire. The rapid fire of Blade is its main DPS, which you can't really do if you're dodging constantly. This weapon requires excellent RNG for chapters 10 and 11. Now coming in third is the Tornado. Nearly everyone says that this weapon is OP, and for a good reason. It has a built-in pierce and has return damage since it acts like a boomerang. With an attack speed of 1.73 and the base damage of 1673 with return damage considered, this results with the highest DPS of 3328 along with crit and a damage multiplier of 0.80. Now the pros for Tornado is that it's the king of boss fights. Greatest strength is giving players more skill options due to its built-in pierce and return damage, which are considered as top tier passives. This means you can pick up 2 extra abilities basically. It has a higher success rate of completing a chapter. A common tornado is slightly stronger than the great bow, and a great tornado is slightly stronger than the rare bow. This weapon stands strong dealing with swarms. Strong in chapter 7, which in my opinion is the first extremely hard chapter after beating the previous chapters. Because chapter 7 is just filled with bosses, this weapon, the king of bosses, is pretty darn great. Now the cons of Tornado. It's good to note that the popular ability Ricochet skews with the trajectory of Tornado. This is because the ability reduces the damage of Tornado. The initial hit is not very high in Tornado because it applies twice. However, by using Ricochet, you will cut this damage by half. Ricochet deals less damage than the next targets it hits, which means the next target will most likely get hit for very little damage. As the Tornado has a built-in piercing modifier, Ricochet would cancel this out by jumping to the next target. Bouncy Wall is also an ability that reduces the damage of Tornado as it may bounce in a different direction, and therefore not apply the return damage to the same target. There is no knockback at all on Tornado, which means it's quite challenging when fighting melee monsters. This weapon requires good skill RNG for chapters 5, 8, 10, and 11 to make up for the lack of knockback. Now coming in at the strongest weapon of Archero is the Deathscythe. Scythe has the highest base damage to compensate for the lowest attack speed. Its knockback effect and epic ability Headshot are unrivaled. Headshot has a 50% chance to instantly kill mobs at 30% health or lower. The value of this passive scales up exponentially. With the slowest attack speed of 1.43 and the highest base damage of 1956, this results in a total DPS of 3217 along with crit and a damage multiplier of 1.45. Pros of this weapon is that it has the best passive, has the strongest knockback, deals a lot of base damage. No other weapon can reproduce Scythe's stage clearing speeds. Scythe is strong on almost all chapters, extra strong in chapters 3, 5, and 8, strongest endgame weapon, and it's amazing in chapter 10 and 11. Now the cons of Deathscythe is that it has the slowest attack speed. The knockback can sometimes push enemies' projectiles to hit you, if you know what I mean. This happens by repositioning an enemy that's ready to hit you. This doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen. It is highly recommended to stutter step, which is when you tap the screen or move slightly between attacks to reset the attack animation. This will result in a significant DPS boost. This weapon is not ideal in stages or bosses where the player is under constant attack or projectiles are flooding the screen. When trying to avoid damage, Scythe does not have enough time to follow through with an attack animation. This results in forfeiting some DPS. The Deathscythe is weaker in chapter 9. Speaking about endgame, Serpent Rings are the staple endgame accessory for their dodge perks and bonus damage against ranged monsters and bosses. Now for some conclusion and tips. All weapons are great in their own way, each coming into their own spotlight depending on the situation. The weapon type is always secondary to the skills you RNG, which means one good or bad skill can change the tempo of your run. The difficulty of the game is first determined by weapon level, to equipment levels, to RNG skills, and then muscle memory and your reaction speed. The correct skill combination is more important than anything else for overcoming a chapter. There are some stages where you won't be able to beat it without the wingman ability or the shield guard ability. Certain bosses you won't be able to beat without buying a 30 gem continue, which is only recommended for bosses in chapter 7+. I know not everyone buys gems. I'm also someone who just relies on the free gem rolls mostly. So if you want, you can save up the gems that you got for free from watching ads for gem revives. But use them very carefully. Don't use them for bosses that you know you can beat with time. If I do use a gem revive, I usually keep it for the end boss. but only if that boss is very hard. There are some mini bosses that are actually harder than the end boss. Dodge Master and Invincibility ability are useful after you've picked up your top tier DPS skills, sometimes even better than taking a HP boost. Stutter Stepping is equally effective on all weapons except for Blade and should be utilized until your second attack speed major ability. SkyIir has also provided a minimum item levels and recommended weapons for your chapter. There is no such thing as being over-leveled in a game where RNG takes precedence over everything else. Higher, always the better. Weapon and chest armor are the most important, the rest can be lower. With enough practice, someone could potentially beat any chapter with much lower gear, but those are the exceptions. Here I'll leave a screenshot where you can pause if these chapters apply to you. SkyIir has left an important tip along with the best weapons to use in emoji form. If you couldn't figure it out, the skull is the Deathscythe. It's good to note that the bow is not recommended for chapters 5 to 11. 3 things to remember. Number 1, the most important tip is to RNG the right skills. Number 2, your gear rarity or levels are too low. Keep farming the highest chapter you're at or the one below it to raise your item level, which can take weeks. Number 3, if you're still struggling with the right gear and the right RNG skills, this means you haven't developed the muscle memory required to predict and dodge the enemy specific to your chapter. With enough repetition, you'll eventually get the patterns down, even if it seems impossible at first. I can 100% agree with this, as I've told a lot of you before. Trust SkyIir and trust me, this really will show as long as you keep at it. Now again, huge thank you to SkyIir for putting this all together for the very awesome Archero community that we're all a part of. I've linked his Reddit thread where you can carefully read it, and also has a graph where you can find out what the strongest weapons are in terms of damage values in all rarities from common to legendary. If you like, I recommend commenting any questions you may have on the Reddit post provided. As far as I could tell, SkyIir is very communicative and responds in a timely manner. Another shout out to Trending Hobbit, who assisted SkyIir with the DPS formula and for putting together the most comprehensive spreadsheet in the game. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like this video if you found it helpful or enjoyable. If you'd love more Archero content, please do subscribe and click the bell to be up to date with both in-depth guides and simple guides for Archero. I thank you very much for supporting my videos. Leave any of your own tips, questions or suggestions for future Archero videos in the comments down below. I hope to catch you for the next one. Bye!